Welcome to Ben TV. You're here with Peter Groot, and today my special guest is Clem Newton-Brown, the member for Paran. And welcome, Clem, to Ben TV.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. What motivates you in public life?
Well, I started off in public life as a local councillor at the City of Melbourne, and I really loved the challenges there and the ability to actually come up with ideas and see them come to fruition. And so I thought if I can get a job in state politics up the road from Melbourne City Council, I'd be able to achieve even more things. So that's, I suppose, what drives me.
Who are your political heroes?
Well, as a member of the Liberal Party, Robert Menzies is a big figure in Liberal politics, and what I particularly like about him is that he blended the economy with social issues, and I think that mix and that balance that he had was right.
Last year, you did come into some controversy when you was part of the government that reintroduced the right to discriminate, and I was going to give you just a brief story now. You know, you can have a gardener working in a Catholic hospital and he could have the same partner, and that Catholic hospital has the right then to sack the gardener, and you could have a Catholic principal who, you know, earns extra income tutoring but doesn't declare it in his taxes, you know, is quite rude to his wife, doesn't respect her, expects her to do all the housework, and the Catholic Church would be in their legal right to say to the gardener, I'm sorry, we don't want to employ you, yet to the principal, they would say, well, you seem to be an upstanding member of the society. What do you think about that?
Yes, well the equal opportunity legislation is actually full of exemptions to allow people and groups to discriminate, and for instance, Joy FM, if they want to employ somebody who is sympathetic to GLBTI issues, they're able to discriminate in that way. Similarly, with issues to do with sporting clubs, if there's a all girls or all boys competition, so it is a framework that prevents discrimination but also allows discrimination in certain ways. Now the changes that the Liberal Party went to the last election with were to allow faith-based schools to discriminate so that they could employ only people that adhered to their principles. Now this was an election commitment, and it was, as all the liberal policies are being implemented, this one was implemented as well last year. And yes, some people think the balance was tipped too far in the direction of the schools, but that was an election commitment, and it was a policy that we went to the election on.
Talking about discrimination, we just had a recent Queensland state election this year, and the Katter Australia Party started off, according to Newspoll, with I think a Newspoll result of about 4%. During the election campaign, they aired that quite homophobic commercial, and their final news poll result on the Saturday was 9%. They ended up with an election result of about 11%. So we know that you can garner in a community quite homophobic comment. What can you do as a politician to try and stop that occurring here in Victoria?
Well, that was an action which was it was terrible, and it wasn't an action of either any of the political parties, or the Labor, Liberal, or Greens. It was Bob Katter doing that, and I don't think you'd find that any, certainly the Liberal Party, and I expect the Labor Party as well, and the Greens would not engage in that sort of activity in an election campaign. It's certainly something which has never happened before, and I wouldn't expect that it would happen in Victoria.
Okay, that's interesting, because we will have a federal election next year and we'll have a state election the year after. So you don't think that a homophobic campaign will be a significant issue in either of those campaigns?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be coming from the Liberal Party, and I would, my colleagues can speak for themselves in the Labor and the Greens, but I would be surprised if it would come from them either. But certainly, I suppose if Katter were to run a candidate here, then I suppose there is potential for that to happen. But I expect that Liberal, Labor, and Greens would join forces to stamp that out, as I think happened to a large extent up in Queensland.
part of that is, I think, I know when I see in the press negative issues or stereotypes about gay issues, I always think, oh my God, they're talking about me, and I get a negative feeling about that. And just touch on a very sensitive subject here, suicide. We have about 500 young Australians commit suicide every year between the ages of 18 and 34, and approximately 30 to 38% of that is GLBTI orientated. What can we do as a society to try and reduce those terrible statistics?
Yeah, Peter, there's no doubt that the young gay males are overly represented in the suicide figures, and something has to be done about it. And certainly the Baillieu government has committed significant resources to addressing this issue, particularly through Minister Wooldridge's $4 million GLBTI mental health initiatives. And that's basically what she did, was bring all the various groups together and say, this is the money that we've got to devote to this issue, how can we best spend it? So there's various groups that have been funded, and for example, Minus 18, they were a group of young guys who hold socially inclusive events for kids, and they're getting funding when previously they didn't. Safe Schools Coalition, Way Out, and going out into the regional areas with other organisations. So it's a new approach, and it's one where the government has certainly recognised that something needs to be done about making people feel inclusive and included and accepted.
This year I gave you Noel Tuvi's book, Little Black Bastard. What did it teach you?
Well, gee, what a life he's had. It was incredible to read about the disadvantage that he had growing up. Dirt poor Aboriginal kid growing up in Melbourne, and all the hurdles that he had to go through, and then to emerge as a great artist, and amazing resilience, I suppose, is what that book taught me.
As a Liberal, do you often find that the media and the wider section often thinks that, well, you're not actually for GLBTI issues? Do you think there's that perception that Liberals are actually against?
Well, I think the Labor Party's been very good at painting the perception that they're more GLBTI friendly. But I think if you look at history, it was the Liberal Party that decriminalised homosexuality in the first state in Australia was South Australia in 1972. That was followed federally by Gorton, which was supported by Andrew Peacock and Philip Ruddock. And I might add that Paul Keating didn't support it, and anyway that flowed through the states. Dick Hamer in Victoria decriminalised homosexuality in 1980, and the last one was a Liberal Premier in Tasmania. So other than New South Wales, it was Liberal premiers and Liberal governments that took the initiative. Now, as far as 2004 goes, I think that was the turning point where Howard changed the Marriage Act to redefine marriages between a man and a woman, and certainly that is something which I personally don't agree with, but that was done, and that I think is a turning point for the GLBTI community. But bear in mind that the Labor Party voted as a bloc to support that legislation, so I don't think that the Labor Party can legitimately claim any greater precedence on support.
Well, thanks, Clem, for being on Ben TV here.
Thank you,
and we're about to go for a short break, and I'll be back shortly. Thank you. My name is Peter de Groot, and you're on Bent TV. Tonight we are doing the Polly special, and my next Polly up is Sue Penquick, MLC for Southern Metropolitan. Welcome to Bent TV.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
My pleasure. What motivated you to join politics?
The environment right at the start, and I was very inspired by Bob Brown and other environmentalists that were fighting to save the forests, the Franklin campaign, etc. So that motivated me to look to that area of politics, but also social justice is a big area of concern for me.
Tell our viewers 3 special things about yourself.
Well, talking about the environment, I haven't eaten meat since I was 20, and that's mainly because of the environmental damage that I think is done by the livestock industry and even the agricultural industry widely. You asked me 3 special things. The other one is I love swimming. That's probably one of my favourite activities, particularly at the beach in Port Phillip Bay. So I swim at Brighton Baths and other parts of the bay.
We are very blessed in being so close to the beach here in Melbourne.
And we are. Southern Metropolitan is a bayside
I
electorate.
should confess, Sue is one of my MLCs. Sue, big issue for the last few years has been marriage equality. The Greens have been pushing very hard on it.
That's right.
But Adam Bandt has still got that religious exemption in. Why?
Well, it's to make sure that it's to make it that it's not compulsory for any person to conduct a same-sex marriage, but it leaves it open for religious people to do that if they so desire.
If we had a group in Australia that decided we don't want to have mixed racial marriages and promoted it, that'd be brought down pretty hard, both by the political and the media and the general populace. Yet why do we allow religious groups to discriminate just because of sexuality?
Well, I don't think it's allowing them. I think it's just not forcing them to, which is, I think, slightly different. And I presume, I don't know, but I would presume there's probably some religious people who wouldn't conduct an interracial marriage either, even though they may not say that.
I understand that there are those people in society, but I think they are kept quiet by the rest of society. How can we, or you especially, since you're a politician, a bit more influence within our society, to introduce that we have a society that doesn't have that discrimination regarding sexuality?
Well, the Greens have been very strong on removing discrimination from all aspects of the law. In Victoria, we had changes to the Equal Opportunity Act in 2009-2010, which were good, but still left in religious exemptions for religious schools and other organisations to discriminate based on sexuality. And the Greens moved amendments, I personally moved amendments to have those removed from the Act, and they weren't supported by the other parties. And I can't understand why they're still allowed in the Equal Opportunity Act, because they're completely contradictory to the objects of the Act.
The recent Queensland state election of this year, the Katter Australia Party started, according to Newspoll, electioneering about 4%. Featured a rather shocking television commercial, brought their vote up, according to Newspoll, by election day to 9%, so gave them a 5% swing in effect. And actually on election day they did better than that, they actually got 11%. So you can garnish votes in our society by being homophobic. How can the Greens try and stop that occurring in Victoria?
Well, we were outraged, as most people were, by what Bob Katter's Australia Party was doing, and we called for those ads to be withdrawn, and were very outspoken in opposing what he was doing. And there are politicians, not just him, others who will play the race card or a homophobic card, and it's very, very distressing and disappointing that people do that. And so that's why it's important that the Greens and others stand up to oppose that.
Justice is the love language of politicians. I don't know if you know that. So when we're talking about justice, we're talking about who we like and who we dislike in our society. Would the Greens propose bringing legislation to ban homophobia in comment, both radio, print and spoken word?
Well, we have already laws in the state of Victoria where people can take those sort of complaints to the Equal Opportunity Commission, the anti-discrimination laws. But unfortunately, we still have a situation where there is an ability to discriminate under the law. And I think that, from my point of view, getting rid of those discriminations in the law are the best way to set the example for the rest of the community, which is why I think same-sex or marriage equality is also very important, because it sends a signal that it's not right to discriminate against a certain proportion of the population based on their sexuality. Then everyone should be equal and everyone should be able to avail themselves of the same privileges under the law.
Approximately 500 young Australians between the ages of 18 and 34 commit suicide every year. It's a shocking statistic.
It is.
What's even worse is between 30 and 38% of those people are GLBTI, and we, as you know, we don't make up 30 to 38% of the Australian population. What can the Greens do to try and help lower those percentages?
Well, again, I think it's leadership in the political sphere that's required to stand up against homophobia and to put in place programs to assist people who do feel discriminated against and may be suffering it in their families, so that there's assistance for that. But I think the symbolic things are very important: marriage equality, anti-discrimination out of the law, so that everybody's equal, and that sets the best message. I think that we are all equal, and we keep needing to keep saying that, and that other parts of the community, in our diverse community where we have people with different sexualities across, it's all part of the community, always has been, and there's nothing unusual about it or anything for anybody to be opposing other people for. So I think they're the most important messages that can be sent to the community. That will then help stamp out discrimination.
Well, if our viewers are interested in about joining the Greens or learning more about their GLBTI policies, where can they go to find out some information?
Oh, probably to our website, greens.vic.org.au.
Well, thank you, Sue, for being here on Ben
Thank
TV
you.
with me, and best of luck with helping change our society so there's less discrimination in
No
it.
discrimination.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I give you a political promise. We'll be back very shortly. Thank you. My name is Peter de Groot and you're here on Ben TV, and tonight is the Polly Special, and I'm going to welcome my very special guest, Martin Foley, MLA for Albert Park,
Thank
who
you,
is
Peter.
also my MLA. Thank you.
My honour to be so.
What inspires you in politics?
The fact that there continues to be such gross inequities in life chances and opportunities for so many of our fellow citizens. That's what doesn't inspire me, it motivates me, it enrages me, but it's the ever evolving story of our community, that there's always more to be done for the cause of equality and justice.
You are well known for your support for the GLBTI community. What made you that way?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it's just the fact that we've seen waves of movements for equality in Australia over the last 100 and something years. There was a movement for the equality for working people. There was the movements for removing discrimination based on race, the White Australia policy, the equity for women, and when you look at it, the discrimination against the GLBTI community is one of the last frontiers of inequity that needs to be tackled in our community, and we've still got a long way to go.
What happened then with Australia? We were the first ones to give women the vote. We were very slow with
Second, New Zealand beat us.
our cousins. We were very slow with dealing with our Aboriginal issues. But we are lagging the world on GLBTI issues.
We are.
The Netherlands, 11 years
Spain.
ago, had marriage equality. Why is Australia going from being a proactive society in delivering freedoms and rights and even wealth to whole sections of community, and today we seem to be fighting that?
That's a very good question. I don't have a simple answer other than the fact that there needs to continue to be the efforts to confront that discrimination and inequity wherever it occurs, and for some reason in the Australian psyche, in the Australian culture, there's this pushback, as we've seen in Queensland in recent times, that somehow thinks that providing equality of opportunity and outcomes for GLBTI fellow citizens is going to be the end of civilisation. And that approach has to be confronted for what it is, based on fear, misunderstanding and ignorance.
Well, you did mention the Queensland election. Katter's Australia Party started off the election campaign according to Newspoll, one of the good polls to watch what's happening in the world. 4% they said at the start of the campaign. By election day they were saying 9%. Election result was 11%. We know what drove that. That terrible commercial drove it. What can you as a Victorian politician ensure that A, the next federal election, and B, the next state election aren't fought on similar issues?
Well, Queensland is a very different cultural landscape to Melbourne and Victoria. But having said that, there are pockets of significant homophobia. There are pockets of significant outright hatred towards GLBTI fellow citizens. And it's not just a question of saying we have to oppose it, which of course we do, and have grandiose high-level positions. It's a issue of how can we get out there and practically put in place programs, change our own daily lives, our own daily communities to confront and deal with it. So things like the Safer Schools program that former Education Minister Bronwyn Pike brought in Victoria, which thankfully has been maintained by the current government. Programs that shape young people's values early around tolerance and inclusion in their schools, in their communities, in their families. That way, I think we will grow the culture of tolerance and inclusion, and the sort of anachronisms that allow Bob Katter's Australia Party to just play the lowest common denominator and fear will be shown for what they are.
Approximately 500 young people every year commit suicide. It's an appalling statistic. That's between the ages of 18 and 34. Of that, between 30 and 38%, depending which Beyond Blue or PFLAG you look at, will say what percentage of that 500. What can we do in our society to help reduce that appalling figure?
I think there's two big issues here. First and foremost, why is it that young people are experiencing difficulties or uncertainties in their gender identity or sexual preference? Why is it that they feel somehow or another that this is unusual and puts them in a disadvantaged position where mental health problems are disproportionate like that, and that sadly results far too often in suicide? So in terms of, again, practical programs on the ground, dealing in communities, dealing with the Safer Schools programs that make people who are questioning and finding their own gender identity or sexual preference feeling as a legitimate expression of who they are, is one part of it. But more broadly, I think whilst we continue to have this view that somehow or another the GLBTI community needs to be seen through this deficit frame, that somehow or another it's exceptional because it's out there and wacky and mentally unstable, that is continuing to predispose so many of our GLBTI brothers and sisters in that frame. Until such time as it's based on the notion of justice and a human right to express yourself and your human identity and your sexuality and your gender identity in a particular way, until we approach things in a human rights context, we will continue to be dealing with these issues.
Well, we did have this year Bishop Pell on the ABC when his debate with Richard Dawkins described gays as being flawed Oriental rugs. How do we stop that occurring? That was on a million people watched that on Australian television. How do we stop that from occurring?
Again, I don't pretend to understand the mindset of the leading member of the Roman Catholic Church in Australia, but offensive is one word for it. Backward looking and putting themselves way out of context of where most people's views about tolerance and inclusive communities are. It was highly offensive. But again, it's through building that framework of support and tolerance each and every time intolerance raises its head, and continuing the process of trying to progress this as a community, not just based on programs that need to be supported case by case, community by community, but approaching the whole issues around people's human rights need respect here. People's whose view as it is as to what their sexuality is, to what their gender identity is their business. And once they have expressed that and resolved that in their own view, then the likes of the Roman Catholic Church or anyone else need to butt out.
Thanks, Martin, for being here on Ben TV.
Peter. My pleasure.
Great pleasure. Thanks for watching Ben TV. If you'd like to know more information, you can email us at feedback@bentv.org.au or jump on our Facebook, and we will see you here on the next Bent time on the next Bent channel. Thank you.